All right, welcome back. This is episode 2 of John's Voice, and I'm hoping to pick right back up where we left off the last time. In the last episode, I talked a lot about the history of the Shroud of Turin, the Sudarium, the Spear of Destiny, and so the whole purpose and goal behind John's Voice is about introducing people to the truth. Now, I just want to go ahead and lay it out there that when you hear me say introducing the truth, I know that I'm going to interject a religious component, and that if you are not religious, this is going to repel you immediately. And trust me, I know, coming from someone who is new to being a believer, over 40 years I spent as an atheist first, then maybe a non-believer. And so I understand that the moment that you bring in spirituality, I'm out. And I get that. I truly get that. But what I'll also tell you is that the truth doesn't care if you like it or not. The truth does not, it's not affected by your opinion of it. It still continues to be the truth. One of the sayings that I remember as a kid is the truth is like rain. It doesn't care who it falls on. So when I use truth, just know that what is also being implied in there, as John foretold the coming of Jesus, Jesus proclaimed to be the truth. And so anytime that I use the word truth, I am in fact referring to Jesus Christ. Now, I get it. It is immediately going to repel you if you have no matter of faith. And I won't say that I don't blame you. But I will ask you to continue listening even if you can't accept this yet. Because in talking of all of these things and how do I get to this point where I'm at now, it's important to kind of understand that I feel what that was like. I know what that was like to hear that and have to go, oh boy, here we go, some more spirituality nonsense. But there were things and elements of it that I also happened to notice were still there. Like my anger, my frustration with people of faith did not subside the more that I spoke to them. I became intrigued as to why people found it necessary to believe in this higher power, in this spirituality. And like I said, I read a vast majority of the world's religions or was exposed to them. And I'm talking, we can go back to, and I think in the last episode I told you, we start with the Tao Te Ching, the Bhagavad Gita, and you can even come forward. Like I was thoroughly enjoying reading Conversations with God, which is more of a New Age take on the whole concept of who God is and what God is, and still learned a lot from reading all of those. But when you get down into the matter of facts, into the details of, okay, let's see if we can kind of separate the actual facts around it, and if we can get through some of the allegory, some of the stories that are offered, some of the pie in the sky promises. And again, for us trying to understand, like let's lay the foundation like this. For us to be able to really get it, let's take it out of the realm of spirituality and God for just a moment. Let's take it to something that we can understand. We all know that there's an ocean. We know that. Many times when we go on vacation, we love to go to the ocean. There's just something so breathtaking, something relaxing about going to the ocean. I can't say if it's just the feeling that's in the air, the sand, the waves, the fact that your eyes can stare off into the distance and you know that you ponder what it is on the other side. You know, when you're in California and you're looking, I find that your brain is just perplexed at the breadth, the depth, the width of all the things that are in front of you at that moment. And you conceptually understand that there's sharks, there's whales, there's fish, there's mountains and canyons all underneath that ocean. And your eyes are lost. Like you can't take it all in. It's just way too much. And because you're so inspired by that moment, the thing that you seek to do is you're like, oh, I got to take a picture. And you take this picture and you try to show it to everybody when you get back on your vacation, and you're telling everybody how beautiful it was. And you offer up that picture, but you know that picture does not do it justice. It doesn't capture the wind whipping through the trees. It doesn't capture the smell of Hawaii came to mind, the plumeria, the jasmine on the air, the fresh smell of coconut, the restorative nature of the ocean. It doesn't capture any of that. It's just a picture. And you show it to somebody and they think, oh, that's really nice. But until they can share that experience, it's just a picture to them. It might as well be a wallpaper because you're trying to share with them this thing. So let's think of it like trying to own the ocean. Whatever I take to the ocean, if I take a bucket, if I take a cup, if I take a thimble, if I take a cooler, and I dip it into that ocean, I'm not capturing the ocean. The picture won't do it justice. The bucket won't do it justice. The cooler will only contain salt water, will not contain the spirit of that ocean. Because it's all limited by the capacity of the thing that it's in. And in fact, there's nothing large enough for us to contain the ocean in. It's only something that we can behold, and we can never own it. Now, the same thing comes to mind when we think of infinity. And it's another one of those things that, in reality, we do know that there is such a thing as infinity. I am amazed of knowing that if I could get into a rocket and I could blast off from a specific point on the globe and travel upward, that I could continue on that path for infinity, and I would never cross the same path again. I would die before I ever got to the end of it. And any direction I chose would be an infinity, never to cross the same path. If I did not have the ability to turn back on the axis with which I came, I would never find the earth again. So our brain, while we understand the concept of infinity, we cannot behold it. The capacity for the human brain cannot contain infinity. We are in infinity. We are living in infinity. But we can't fully understand it. We cannot fully grasp it. We can write out equations for it. We can draw symbols for it, just as we can take pictures of the ocean, just as we can put salt water in a container. And all we can do is try to convince others of how majestic this really is. And so if my goal were to be to introduce you to God in God's entirety, while I would love to possess that capability, it would not exist. In fact, I think one of the most profound things that happens when you come to know who and what God is that God cannot be limited to my understanding. If he could be, then it would not be the God that is, because that would be a limited God based on the capacity of my brain. And so the word that gets used a lot is mystery. And what is a mystery? It's something that can't be fully understood. So just as we can't fully own the ocean, just as we fully can't understand infinity, the parts of it that we do And the parts of it that we don't are what make it mysterious. And that's okay. That is okay. Because I do believe I could have drove myself crazy looking for a solid, when in fact there was nothing solid to find. And all that really happened is that after all the pursuit, is that I caught a glimpse. And oddly enough, I caught the glimpse through the perspective that most people would miss. And that was that science was not disproving God. In fact, it was actually proving that there was indeed a God. And you can say, well, how can you make that kind of a statement where science proves it? Well, merely take a look at some of the things that I've pointed to, the Shroud of Turin, and the fact that science is continually, and I would tell you that there are people who seek to go and study that shroud because they want to prove that it is a fake. And why? Because if they can prove that that's a fake, then they can prove that Jesus did not exist. This was all made up. This is all a lie. It's all fabrication. And so whether you go to the shroud with the goal in mind of proving that it is real, or whether you go to the shroud with the goal in mind of disproving it and exposing it as a fake, it doesn't matter which one you go to. The evidence that's revealed from the studies are all pointing at the same thing. So now, when I'm talking to you about those other religions that I had looked at, and what I was truthfully seeking for was just that, the truth. And was enamored by, like I said, I think on the last episode, that I was enamored by the Tao does a beautiful job of describing this energy called the Tao, which is kind of the energy of life. But I will tell you that there are words that are synonymous with each other, and if you doubt it, I tell you what you could do. If you sat down and you tried to describe life, and tell me, when do you use the word? Like, tell me, when do you use the word? I look at a tree, I see that a tree is alive, or I can see that a tree is dead. I look at the grass, see that it's alive, see that it's dead. I look at a human, see it's alive, see it's dead. I look at insects, animals, I can all see life and death occurring in those places. But isn't it odd that when I use the word life for a tree, it doesn't necessarily do the same things that a human does? Like, if I'm referring to the life of a tree, I'm referring to the color and how it grows and the vibrance of it. And if it's dead, the absence of that. It doesn't breathe. It actually helps us to breathe based off of what it produces, but it doesn't breathe, it doesn't talk, it doesn't see, it doesn't communicate, but yet I will use the same word to describe the life, because I will say that this tree's alive or this tree's dead, just as I look at a human and can see whether they're alive or dead. And if you ever just examine when do you use the word, whatever you use to define life is God, because God and life are the same thing. God and love is the same thing. Truth is the same thing. And I kind of know mathematically that there was one thing that happened in math class that I have to bring this up. In math class, it was always talked about, I'll never forget the class where I was exposed to, it was, what is the value of -5 in the absolute? So there was these three realms. There was the negative side, there was the positive side, and then there was this thing called the absolute. And that the absolute value of -5 was just 5, and the absolute value of +5 was just 5. So that the negative and the positive both share the same value in the absolute. Mathematically, you've basically proven that there was a place called the absolute, of where things were not negative nor positive. Incidentally, written in the Bible, it says, "Call not a thing good nor evil, for you know not what is good nor what is evil. But bless everything and be a blessing to everything." Well, let's change the value of that which is positive to that which is good, and the value of that which is negative to that which is evil. Only something from the realm of the absolute would be able to say, call not a thing good nor evil. Call not a thing positive nor negative. That it had a value in the absolute. Let's look at another mathematical truth. 0 has the same value on this scale because it's neither positive nor negative, and it shares the exact same value in the absolute. So nothing is the only thing that is the same, whether it be on the plane of relativity being that there is positive, there is negative, or in the realm of the absolute, where there is nothing positive nor negative. Nothing has a value in both planes. The hypothesis that I'm offering to you is nothing is greater than God. It's the powers that are beheld in each of those. Now, when I look at the rest of the world's religions, and I notice they all followed the same mode. They followed this, would give me a book. I have several books in the library that contain, like I spoke of before, Bhagavad Gita, Tao, Buddhist writings, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, let's see, the Tanakh, the Old Testament, New Testament, King James Version, let's see, what else is in there? The Gnostic Gospels, Dead Sea Scrolls, what else is in there? There is the King James, I think I said the King James Version of the Bible. There is the Quran. There is the Book of Mormon, the Doctrines and Covenants, Pearl of Great Price, a lot of the writings from Neil Donald Walsh as far as Conversations with God, Disappearance of the Universe. Like I said, it's just replete. And for some of the more established religions rather than the New Age, they always tend to follow the same method. It was to give me a book and tell me to read it and then pray on it. And then after I prayed on it, that they would follow back up with me after I had done so that we could discuss it. That mode also is where I found that to be the reason why most people were repelled by it. Because, so if I'm going to read this book, and in your belief system that God is somehow going to reveal to me himself through his writing, and I have no knowledge whatsoever, then that means that for the things that I don't know, well, who do I follow back up with? Well, I follow back with the person who gave me the writing. And whatever their belief system is how they're going to guide me based off of what it says. And if my interpretation differs, then I'm either going to be corrected, or if it's along the same lines, it may be embraced and I may be allowed to continue down this faithful path. And then over time, it's just become out of habit that I do that. And I can tell you this right now to be sure. We hate to be wrong. One of the most difficult things about being a human being is that we hate to admit that we've been lied to. And that we will hold on to a lie and call it the truth just because we've done it for so long. You hear it at your job, you hear it at work, you'll hear, well, that's what we've done for, this is the way we've always done it. And, I've told every place I've worked at before, when I became aware of this, what's right is what's left after you do everything else wrong. If someone comes along and they propose to you the right thing to do, if you've been doing the wrong thing for a long time, your first response, your absolute initial first response is to call that thing that they're proposing wrong. Why? Because we've never done it that way. So it must be wrong. But what I'll also tell you is this: if you're going to get somewhere you've never been, you're going to have to do something that you've never done. I wound up here by not being afraid to be wrong, not being afraid to challenge what I thought to be true. And for the longest time, I thought it was true. There was no such thing as God. And I was wrong. This is all based on a very funny, I found this funny, that the principle, one of the things that was said during the Nazi Party's regime And I find this very applicable to today. One of Hitler's guys that he, I guess, talked about was influenced by, and again, this is kind of speculation on my part, because again, I don't study a lot about the Nazi Party. I did study about Hitler. I do also have Mein Kampf in the collection, because I think it's important sometimes that we do understand nobody does anything wrong given their model of the world. Today, when we look at what happened in history, yes, Hitler was very evil. But at the same time, did he know that he was evil when he started to do it? Did he think he was doing the right thing? I'm almost convinced that he did think it was the right thing to do. Otherwise, he wouldn't have done it. You know, we do that a lot as human beings, is that we can look back. Hindsight will always tell us, hey, you know, I did the wrong thing. I shouldn't have done that. But at the time we were doing it, we thought it was right, or we wouldn't have done it. I don't know many people who could say that they knew what the wrong thing was and knowingly chose to do it. No, they either chose to do it because they were convinced that the reward would be so that they wanted to do it in order to get away with it. But it's only afterwards that they turn back and look, you know, man, that was really the wrong decision. And I challenge you, you look back at your life, at the time you made the decision, you thought and felt like it was the right thing to do. And then only after you did it did you realize, oh man, I should have never have done that. But anyway, so Joseph Goebbels had made this statement, and you want to talk about how much this, it stands to be true today. So Joseph Goebbels was noted for saying that if you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. The lie can be maintained only for such a time as the state can shield the people from the political, economic, and military consequences of the lie. It thus becomes vitally important for the state to use all of its powers to repress dissent, for the truth is the mortal enemy of the lie, and thus by extension the truth is the greatest enemy of the state. This is an expression that is known as the big lie. And Hitler, of course, he also, you can read in Mein Kampf, and in Mein Kampf he makes a statement that is similar along those lines. And what he says was, but it remained for the Jews with their unqualified capacity for falsehood and their fighting comrades, the Marxists, to impute responsibility for the downfall precisely to the man who alone had shown a superhuman will and energy in his effort to prevent the catastrophe which he had foreseen to save the nation from that hour of complete overthrow and shame. By placing responsibility for the loss of the World War on the shoulders of Ludendorff, they took away the weapon of moral right from the only adversary dangerous enough to be likely to succeed in bringing the betrayers of the fatherland to justice. All this was inspired by the principle, which is quite true within itself, that in the big lie there is always a certain force of credibility, because the broad masses of a nation are always more easily corrupted in the deeper strata of their emotional nature than consciously or voluntarily, and thus in the primitive simplicity of their minds they more readily fall victims to the big lie than the small lie, since they themselves often tell small lies in little matters, would be ashamed to resort to large-scale falsehoods. So what is he really saying there? It would be easy for us to identify a complete lie, but it becomes very difficult for us when we also put elements of the truth within that lie. Now, I go back to my discussion of the religions of the world. How I came about to become a Catholic is because of the big lie. I am not saying, and I hope anyone who hears this do not take it as that I believe that all of the Protestant faiths are wrong, because they do contain elements of the truth. If you believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, then you believe the truth. But is it the fullness of the truth? That's where you'll have to hold yourself accountable, to look at it and go, okay, have I believed this so long? Have I believed for so long. And I will tell you, I initially thought the same thing, that Catholics and Christians were two different things. But I am safe in telling you this. All Catholics are Christians, but all Christians are not Catholic. And what does Catholic mean? Catholic means universal. We'll speak more about what it is to be universal. So anyway, when I started to look to see the history of the church and where did all of this stuff come from, the one thing that stood out to me was that the Shroud of Turin is in possession of the Catholic Church. The Sudarium of Oviedo is in possession of the Catholic Church. They have been the whole time. When you hear the argument about the Bible, the Bible's the only source. Well, where did the Bible come from? One is immediately confronted with, where did the Bible come from? Most people would tell you it's the inspired Word of God. That's true, but who is the one who determined what book made it into the Bible and what book didn't? Because I can tell you there are a lot of books, the pseudepigraphal books of the Old Testament, the apocryphal books of the New Testament, the Dead Sea Scrolls. There were a lot of books that just did not make it into the canonization of the Bible. Who decided? Did God decide? Or was it a group of men? And if it were a group of men who decided, where did they get the authority to make the decision? Well, I can tell you that they got that authority to make that decision. And if you merely read, and again, I'm not saying that the Bible is the only authoritative source. No. The church is the authoritative source. The Bible is merely a historical reference point as to where the authority came from. So let me explain. In the current Bible as it is right now, and you would find out today that, even though there's multiple different copies, a lot of that comes from the fact that, the Catholic Church stood to be the only Christian faith for about 1,500 years, up until the point of Martin Luther, who left the church. He was a priest, by the way, and all he did was protest. And in fact, to be Protestant is just that. If you are any of the faiths that are your Baptists, your Church of God, your Lutherans, your Presbyterians, so on and so forth, there's 40,000 of these faiths. And why is that? Well, it's once Martin Luther protested the Catholic Church and he started to teach on his own, and he went against the teaching and the authority of the Catholic Church. So what happens there is that when you do this, when you enter into what's known as schism, you then are also going to find that your people are going to do the same thing that you did. And that is, if they don't like something that you said, they're going to go, no, I like what you said about this, I'm going to keep that. But I don't like what you said about this, so that's it, I'm out. And then they go and they preach a different message than what you preach. And so on and so forth. And that continues, and it continues today as it continues to break and fragment and continue to spawn new religions, new faiths. The Mormons or LDS are also a product of this whole Protestant movement, although they would tell you, no, this was because the prophet that we had, Joseph Smith, the Truth Church was hidden away within Freemasonry, and then it was picked back up again. The True Church was hidden away through Freemasonry, and then along comes Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith then takes Freemasonry and then builds this new faith up on top of it. But even in their faith, the Bible is not considered to be, the Holy Bible is considered to be flawed, but the Book of Mormon is not. And so therefore anything that we talk about in the Bible can easily be rejected because, that one's flawed, but, Joseph Smith, he spoke to the angel Moroni, and the angel Moroni told him, the truth, okay? And so that is part of what happens when you enter into schism and you start breaking away from the church. But where do we get it from? Well, we get that from, it's just the nature, as we talked about in The Big Lie. And that is, as long as I can put the truth in there along with the lie, it's easier for people to accept it. And then by the time they've done it for so long, to hold themselves accountable for saying, why did I believe this for so long? They will easily say everybody else has to be wrong. Why? Because what's right is what's left after you do everything else wrong. Now, so in looking at the evidence, because remember, when we're trying to justify ancient history, there are two things, and preferably three things, that we always need to be able to do that. The first thing is evidence. And I'm offering up right now that the evidence that suggests that Jesus Christ did exist can be found in the Sudarium of Oviedo and in the Shroud of Turin. And based on the information that is contained on the evidence, the second thing that you would need is eyewitness. Now, that is what the New Testament purports itself to be, is eyewitness testimony. There's 4 accounts of this eyewitness testimony through Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And in their eyewitness testimonies, they all speak of this man being crucified in such a way that it did not fit how Romans typically would crucify someone. It just didn't fit. You can study today for how the Romans would do crucifixion, and you will find that they did have multiple ways of crucifying someone. There's some that report like a Y-shaped cross. Some of them are T-shaped. Some of them would nail the heels onto the cross that they would be nailed on. Another one of the common things that were done that the Romans would do is using, and I think in the last episode I had mentioned a Roman whip. The actual word is a flagrum. That, that they would be subjected to this public scourging using a flagrum. That was pretty common. The other thing that was very common was the breaking of the legs. And the reason why they would break the legs is when you place somebody on a cross, the whole idea behind it is very torturous. But it was also to make a public display of, how this person and what they had done, to make it a public display. Above their heads, they would always kind of put what the charges were so that you would know, hey, this is one of the things you don't want to violate in our society, which is why the sign that was hung over Jesus's head, being that of the King of the Jews, while today we see that as them making a proclamation. No. What Pilate had ordered was that was the charge against him. That the reason you're having me crucify this man that I can find no fault with is that he's the King of the Jews. Because if we can remember what the eyewitness testimony says, that he could find no fault with him. So the only charge he could come up with is King of the Jews. And but anyway, at his crucifixion, the thing that kind of stood out was that his legs weren't broken. And why they weren't broken, again, it was the whole idea of breaking the legs was to speed up the asphyxiation, that the person on the cross would suffocate faster, because it's designed to be painful to where they have to push up on the nail that's between their feet in order to be able to take a breath. And so breathing in hurts and breathing out hurts. As I breathe out and my body sags down, this pulls on the nails within the wrist, and then the pain in my feet, and then I have to push up on my feet to be able to breathe. So they would just break the legs, and that would speed up the process of asphyxiation. But in Jesus' case, they didn't do that, which again, this makes his death be one of those that's readily identifiable as being something different than Romans typically would do. In him, they chose one of the Roman soldiers decided to just stab this spear into his side. And as I said before, there were some writings in and I think I told you the name of the writings that occurred, the apocryphal Gospels. So you have the pseudepigrapha, which are books of the Old Testament that weren't included, and then you have the apocryphal which are some of the writings that occurred after. And there was a book called the Gospel of Nicodemus. It was written around the 4th century. Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John are written a lot closer to that time frame, and the Gospel of Nicodemus wasn't written until the 4th century. And in the Gospel of Nicodemus, it gives this Roman soldier a name, and that name that they used was Longinus. Now, you also need to understand that Longinus is a name in Rome at that time, like John or Pete. We don't know for sure if that's the actual name, but he gives him a name, and that's why the Spear of Destiny also has another name. It's called Longinus's Lance. And again, can't confirm nor deny whether or not Longinus did exist. What I can confirm is that there was a spear that was found, and oddly enough, it was housed in Germany at the time. 1912 in Vienna, Hitler, he sees the Spear of Destiny in, I believe it's Habsburg, at the Hofs Museum. And he tells his friend, I think it's Walter Stein, he tells him that he learned all he needed to learn about leading the Nazi Party when he saw the Spear of Destiny. And it's even reported that when he first saw the spear, he was like paralyzed. He was entranced by it when he saw it. And there was a commonly held belief at that time about the Spear of Destiny, and that belief is that if you owned the spear, you could rule the world, but if you lost it, you would have an immediate death. And I'll use what is commonly used as, even, as an atheist reference, is the Bible. This whole this fairy tale is believed about this Spear of Destiny. But Hitler believed that if he could own this, he would rule the world. And to go even further, March 12th, 1938, as Hitler is rising to power, the very first thing that he does is he takes possession of Habsburg, and he goes to the Hofs Museum. He has the Spear of Destiny taken, and he sends it to Nuremberg. And he had the Spear of Destiny in his possession as he was going through the rise of the Third Reich. Now, there was another man who was in charge of protecting that. And again, this is one of those things, I'm going to write it off as coincidence. Because again, I know what it's like to think like an atheist. So I will write it off as coincidence that this next thing happened, but I also think it's important to mention. So at 2:10 p.m., April the 30th, 1945, the Allied forces are arriving there in Germany, in Nuremberg. And General Patton, he knew of the Spear of Destiny. He was a well-read, well-educated man himself. He knew of the Spear of Destiny. And when he sees his power of Nuremberg, one of the things that they also took into their possession was this hidden location of where Spear of Destiny was housed. And shortly after Patton has the Spear of Destiny in his possession, it is believed, and again, I won't get into the conspiracy theories, but it is believed that Hitler commits suicide shortly thereafter. So again, it's one of those, it's very coincidental that the belief is that if you own this, you could rule the world, and if you lost it, you would die. And that certainly seems to be a coincidental thing that happens with Hitler as soon as he lost it. But even if I disregard any of those things, any of those fairy tale beliefs about it, it was said to be a Roman spear that pierced the side of Jesus. Now, what is fascinating is that the tip of this spear of destiny, and I also won't deny that there are said to be 3 different spears of destiny. 2 of the 3, though, it does look like the other Spear of Destiny is nothing more than the bottom piece that the Spear of Destiny that was in Hitler's possession would have fit on. So I would not argue with anybody that, people will manufacture these things because of this belief about them. So, do with that what you will. There were 3 other ones at the time. What I'm saying is that the measurements and the diameters of this thing is key, and it's vital. As to whether it was the actual one that pierced the side of Jesus, I'll even take that out, place that over into speculation, and still tell you that I find it very odd that on the Shroud of Turin, the puncture wound that's in the side of Jesus that was made by this spear, oddly enough, fits the same measurements of the Spear of Destiny, which is reported to be either the Roman spear, if not a replica of that Roman spear. Again, if you're putting together in the 14th century this fake, you would have to know that. You would have to know that that was a Roman spear, that this placement of this spear is going to have to go between, I believe it's the 3rd and the 4th rib, and it's going to have to meet this fatal ability to be able to puncture the side, pierce the heart, and the measurements of this wound coincide with a penetrating force on a spear of this type, deep enough that it would have done exactly what is written in the gospel. As I said, when you're validating ancient history, evidence, eyewitness, are the 2 keys that'll help you determine as to whether or not this is true. So that also I found to be one of those little nuggets that a person who's forging the shroud would have to know that those are the correct measurements. So again, I don't have a suitable argument for that. All of this information too, by the way, if you wanted to look it up yourself, you will find it. This report was published by the ENEA Research Center of Frascati. They spent 5 years studying the Shroud of Turin. At the conclusion of it, they determined that it was not a fake, that the body image was formed by some sort of electromagnetic source of energy, that it is not a medieval forgery, and in fact, when they looked at the superficial coloration of the body image that's on the Shroud of Turin, they also found that they could mimic it, not in the same way that the image on the shroud is, but they were able to find a specific type of laser to burn this image onto the superficial surface of this linen. Oddly enough, it was an excimer laser. And if you don't know what an excimer laser is, again, here's one of those parallels that I find it hard to ignore. An excimer laser is typically used when you are, if you've ever had LASIK surgery, if you've ever had PRK surgery, an excimer laser is what gets used to be able to correct that vision. Let me say that again. The light that was used to create the image on the shroud is the same type of light consistent with repairing one's vision. We all know what happens if we look at a laser for too long. It's written right on the side that it may cause blindness. So again, here's where I find myself having to explain once again that in the gospel, the shroud is merely mentioned as being something that was found on the floor of the tomb. In fact, the sudarium was said to be laying on the table. The shroud was said to be rolled up on the floor. They don't really go into any kind of detail about it. Just say it was there. But then I find Paul on the road to Damascus, he makes a claim that this resurrected man. Now, focus in on this one key feature here. The man who was said to be put to death, all of the people who believed in the man who had been put to death as being the Son of God, all of them claiming that this man who was put to death on the cross, resurrected, was seen again, living again after he was put to death. This man, Paul, was actually there looking for these Christians. His job was to kill them. Long story short, on the road to Damascus, a bright light appears to him and brings him to his knees. In his own words, he says that, he couldn't figure out why he was on trial because there were other of the Pharisees that were, not the Pharisees, but some of their, Jewish also had these guardians in the temple as well that were with him as he was out persecuting Christians. And he asked this question of, why are you just talking to me? I'm not the only person who saw this. He's like, I'm on the road to Damascus. This light appears to me. It brought me to my knees, as well as everyone else who was with me. Now, I heard him speak. I don't know why anybody else didn't hear him speak, but talk to them. They'll tell you they saw the same thing I did. And that experience left Paul blind. The shroud is said to have some form of image on it that was created when a dead body, it explodes in like a millisecond of this bright type light, and they find it to be an excimer laser, or something like an excimer laser. And we have another eyewitness account of saying they see light appearing to them on the road to Damascus that has this same effect. It blinds him, and then his eyes are open. I'm sorry, this is another one of those things of, okay, I'm going to ignore the coincidence again. But I am fascinated by the fact that if you want me to believe this was done in the 14th century, the only thing they can find today that can even do a spot on a piece of cloth is an excimer laser. And they had this capability in the 14th century? Absolutely not. For the first time in history, we have a dead body doing something that no dead body has ever done before. And that is, it vanished in a flash of light and it left behind an image. And that image is still being studied 2,000 years later. From the research itself, it is possible that the body image was formed by a sort of electromagnetic source of energy. Our experiments show that many, not all, the peculiar properties of the body image on the shroud are produced by a burst of photons in a very narrow range of parameters: pulse duration, intensity, number of shots. In particular, vacuum ultraviolet photons account for a very thin coloration depth, the hue of color, and the presence of image in linen parts not in contact with the body. Obviously, it does not mean the image was produced by a laser. Rather, the laser is a powerful tool to test and obtain the light parameters suitable for a shroud-like coloration. It's not paint. Now, the blood that was found on the sudarium and was found on the shroud was, and I think in the last episode I said it was AB positive. I'll even retract the AB positive portion and tell you that there are some speculation as to whether it was AB positive or whether it was AB negative. So I'll take that part back and just say it was AB until there's more solid research that can identify what that is. But let me explain to you also, AB blood is also known to be universal blood. Remember I had said earlier Catholic means universal. So here's the other thing about AB blood. The AB blood system, or AB blood type, they can receive blood from anyone else. So, like, for example, in a blood transfusion, if you give somebody the wrong type of blood, that can be lethal. It can kill them. But individuals with AB blood, they can safely receive blood from a donor with any blood type. So whether it be O, A, B, AB, doesn't matter. This person can take the blood of anyone, as they are known as a universal recipient. So AB is the rarest type of blood. And if you wanted to know more about the AB blood, I'll explain that the answer of it lies in the antigens of the blood that are present in most types of blood. So for example, O blood types, they're unique because they have no antigens in them. And if you have type A blood, you have an antigen that is specific and unique to A blood. If you have B, then of course you have a B type antigen. AB blood type means that both the antigens for A and B blood are both present. And since A and B antigens are present in a person with AB blood, the recipient won't reject that blood because the body then identifies that blood as self rather than foreign. Now, the O blood has no antigens and is referred to as a universal donor blood, and it will not cause a reaction when transfused into a person with type AB blood. A person with AB blood has all the antigens that are possible, and an O negative person has no antigens that would cause a reaction. It is a universal blood. So, as many of the old Christian songs used to say, there's power in the blood. Again, coincidental. So when we find that the blood on the shroud, the blood on the sudarium match, and it happens to be this blood type that could take my blood, your blood of anyone, and it is said to be the blood of Christ that made salvation possible for us. I can't ignore that. I cannot ignore that every single time. It seems as though when they do their research onto Eucharistic miracles, of where the body, if you're not familiar with the Catholic Church, of where the Eucharist, which for many people this would be the round wafer that you see that they give at Catholic Mass, is referred to as the Eucharist, which is the body, and the wine is considered to be the blood. And when they've had miracles of where this wafer turns into something, and I get it. I'm like, no way, it doesn't happen. It does happen. And when they test the blood, it always comes back to be this AB blood. Now, either this is a large hoax that's been perpetuated on us, or this man is who he says he is. He is the truth. He is the way. And all we have to do is follow him. I'm telling you that you can get there without the Bible. You can get there by just doing the research. Look into it for yourself. Here's what I can tell you. Truth is a real thing. Lies are a real thing. Truth and lies are at odds with each other in our society today. If there is one thing that we love as human beings, it's the truth. When you think about any time you've ever dealt in past relationships, the one thing that harms your relationship more than anything is that when you get lied to, it hurts. And I think the saying used to be is that I would rather that you kill me with the truth than let me live with a lie. Ladies and gentlemen, I do see that even in today in our society and all the things that are going on today, this is not about love and hate. It's about the truth. And if you come to know the truth will set you free. Anyway, take care of yourself. God bless. And until next time, I hope to see you again here on John's Voice. God love you.